So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events, events, that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimring and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimring and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. "A slave is as good as gold," Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here. In the second hour of our program today, Professor Richard Wolff will be with us, as he typically is in our second hour Thursday. We're going to be asking, is the dollar doomed? There are increasing signs that we may well not be the reserve currency of the world. What does that mean for Americans? Is it going to wipe us out? And in our third hour, Greg Palast, what is November voting starting to look like? But right now on the line with us, I believe, I'm not seeing him on the phone. Oh, there he is. Right now on the line with us is Dr. Justin Frank, the psychoanalyst and clinical professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science at George Washington University. He is the author of numerous on-the-couch books, Bush on the Couch, Obama on the Couch, Trump on the Couch. Justin Frank, MD is his Twitter handle. And Dr. Frank, welcome back to the program. I'm curious if you think that Donald Trump, I just got this hit, watching Trump at his rally in Tulsa, and then yesterday in Arizona. Today he's going to Wisconsin, large events, lots of people, no masks. As I think I've told you, one of my closest friends, Armin Lehman, was the 16-year-old who delivered the news to Adolf Hitler that the war was over, and then was sitting there in the Führer bunker 2 days later when Hitler committed suicide with him. He was a teenager. He wrote a book about it. Armin has passed on now, but we were very close friends. Is this some sort of Hitler meets Jim Jones drama playing out?
Well, it's hard to do exact analogies, even though Santayana said those who don't pay attention to history are condemned to repeat it. I think that what we're seeing is the incredible conflict that Trump has had since his earliest childhood between being a builder and a destroyer. He would build things up and break them as a child, regularly, all the time. And the part of him that is a destroyer has, I really think, gained ascendance over his life. And once he started being able to fire people on The Apprentice and believe that he was the same person as the character on The Apprentice, he ended up becoming much more of a destroyer than a builder. So when he said, "Make America Great Again," there was an unconscious opposite meaning, which has to do with breaking down the America that we know. I think
so. It's like
makes it like a bit like Jim Jones, and in terms of the Kool-Aid equivalent, I guess, is the coronavirus and not wearing a mask. And the other thing is that one of the things about cult leaders and demagogues like Hitler is that they create a state within a state. And certainly that is something that has happened between Trump and Fox News and Hannity and Rush and all of his tweets. He's created a very tight-knit state of followers who will follow him off a cliff. So in that sense, I think there is a familiar aspect of that. What is so appealing about him is his tremendous power to tap into people's pain, hurt, injury, and need for revenge, and need to destroy, need to attack. And that is very much like Jim Jones also. They're not the same at all, but there are certain kind of resonances between among those three people.
My friend Armin told me that after Hitler got this news and before he committed suicide, that he was raging about how his generals had let him down. And my recollection of the Jim Jones story, and I'm this is just from memory, but I was paying careful attention, as was much of the rest of the country, was that when Congressman Ryan, as I recall, showed up, and Jackie Spears,
Leo Ryan,
Congresswoman, when they showed up, that was in part because he had a couple of people in his camp down there in Guyana, in British Guyana, that whose family was sending them to essentially rescue them, and he felt that they had betrayed him. So for Jim Jones, it was about betrayal. For Donald Trump, it was about or for Hitler, it was about betrayal and incompetence. And in addition to blaming everyone below them and taking no responsibility themselves, they also decided that not only did they have to die themselves, but they had to take as many people with them as possible in the process. Is it too bizarre to think that that's how Trump is thinking right now, at least on an unconscious level?
At this point, nothing is too bizarre. That's the first thing I could say, even as a psychoanalyst. Secondly, one of the things that is very true about betrayal is that the reason Trump lies, for instance, so much is because he felt lied to as a child. And I think that one of the things that became very clear, and I wonder what's going to happen if his niece's book ever comes out, Mary, is that he was lied to, I think, when his parents told him they loved him. So he became a liar to others, and that he wants to fool others. And that's the whole thing with being an artificial person. He says, if you're very rich, people will trust you, people will believe you. That's his thing with that he called truthful, I forgot what he called it, truthful hyperbole.
Right.
And then on The Apprentice, when his willingness to fire people, and the feeling of betrayal. I was thinking of the Phil Everly song, I've been cheated, been mistreated, from 1960 that Linda Ronstadt made famous. But it was basically about betrayal, that he feels betrayed. And I think that his base feels betrayed by the country, by the government, and that was part of his big appeal. And the fear is of having whatever strength they have taken away. So there is a rage that's involved, and it is destructive. So I agree with you. I think you're right on the money here.
Just to boil it. Yeah, just to boil it down a little bit, we have about 2 minutes left. It's sort of like he sees now that he, in all probability, is not going to get reelected, which means that he's going to be prosecuted after he leaves office. I mean, this is what Bill Barr's removal of the Southern District of New York prosecutor was all about, in my opinion. And so, I mean, isn't suicide also an assertion of control? Is it possible that he's just saying, okay, I'm not going to let you guys take me down. I'm going to take myself out with COVID, thinking that he'll go down in history as a great martyr who died of this horrible disease?
I don't buy that completely, and I'll tell you why.
That's reassuring.
Too cruel and mean. He's too cruel and mean to kill himself.
Wow.
He is just too mean. He doesn't want to give anybody that satisfaction. So that's the first thing. He's a very nasty, cruel person. He uses the word nasty over and over again about a reporter who asks any question that has anything to do with the truth, because the truth is his enemy. So I think that he would not, I don't see him as being self-destructive that way. There's a form of self-destructiveness that is at the end of the Narcissus myth, where he is so busy looking at himself in the reflection in the lake that he stops and he dies. He falls in and drowns. So in that sense, there's a way in which he's not taking care of himself properly, and that may be what you see with the COVID and the maskless. But I think he's much more, to me, he feels much more grandiose. I think that he might be prosecuted, and he's afraid of that, but I think he'll go out in flames and develop all kinds of post-election tweeting and revenge kind of things. He's not a quiet guy.
Yeah, there's talk about his companies acquiring One American News Network, for example.
Yeah,
Dr. Justin Frank.
That's where it's at.
Yeah, Trump on the Couch is the book. Dr. Justin Frank, thanks so much for being with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll be right back. Dr. Frank, extraordinary guy, and so insightful. I have a rant for you. Stick around about all of this. And welcome back. A couple of things that I wanted to alert you to. I think these are just worth paying attention to. Although our big question for the day is, why do you think that Donald Trump is willing to kill so many Americans? Why is he so enthusiastic about showing up at rallies without masks, with people without masks? Is it possible that he's being suicidal, or is it possible he's being homicidal, or is it possible that he just has such an inflated sense of himself that none of this matters? Why would Donald Trump want to kill Americans? And why is it that Jair Bolsonaro is doing the same thing in Brazil? What's in it for them? Why is it that Duterte is doing the same thing in the Philippines, Orban in Hungary, all these dictators, Erdogan in Turkey, all these dictators who are basically saying, doesn't matter. Meanwhile, in Columbus, Ohio, there's this report that men in jeans and SWAT vests jumped out of vans holding, a protest is going on. This is a kind of a breaking story. It's over at rawstory.com. As this protest rally is going on, this van pulls up and they target one particular protester. The back door of the van, it's all blacked out. But it's a police van. I mean, it doesn't have lights on top, but it has the lights under the headlights. And as police van pulls up, a bunch of guys dressed like SWAT team people jump out with semi-automatic weapons and push people away, grab one single protester, and throw him in the van and take off. I mean, this is how authoritarian governments work. This is very troubling. And it's just something, frankly, that I think we should all be very, very concerned about. Also, the Wall Street Journal is reporting, and this was yesterday, but it's now moved into the over to Raw's Story. David K. Johnston picked up on this, and yesterday the Wall Street Journal reported that China is doing their level best and apparently succeeding at infiltrating the Trump campaign. And that there have been agents of China who have been donating money to Donald Trump. They've basically become major donors. This one guy, the Journal article focused on 4 men, 3 of whom run fronts for the Chinese military and the Chinese Communist Party. This one guy, Ben Tang, gave $300,000 to the Trump Victory Fund, which, of course, gave him access to Trump. A fourth man created Chinese Americans for Trump. It just goes on and on. Wang gave $150,000 to one of the Trump groups. In 2017, Mr. Wang attended a Republican National Committee invitation-only leadership meeting in San Diego as a guest of the GOP. The Chicago people familiar with the matter said the gathering was an early chance for Republican leaders to plan the path forward for the party after Mr. Trump's inauguration. Accompanying Mr. Wang to the meeting as Mr. Steele's guests were three men with links to China's government. Amazing stuff. Anyhow, we're live. It's Thursday. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. Specifically, it's over at thomhartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, etc., not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters, not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. So, I've got a larger question, in fact, for you here, and that is, why is Donald Trump so enthusiastic about Americans dying? Why is this? 2 weeks after our first diagnosed case, COVID-19 case here in the United States, up in Washington State, 2 weeks later, Republicans in the United States Senate voted to, with the exception of Mitt Romney, to refuse to impeach Donald Trump. They said that they didn't think he could do any more damage. Senator Susan Collins famously said that he was going to back down now from his most outrageous behavior because the House of Representatives had slapped his hands. Right. But now, newly empowered and feeling invincible, he seems hell-bent on a crusade to kill hundreds of thousands of Americans. We've got 122,000 dead Americans right now. You look at other countries around the world, it's 15, 20, 50, 100, 300. Here in the United States, it's 122,000 corpses. Now, nobody knows why Donald Trump is so enthusiastic about encouraging people to get sick and die from COVID-19. But there are a few possible viable theories. Trump and the Republicans' rhetoric all shifted the day after, or in some cases 2 days after April 7th. April 7th was the day that the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News all reported that blacks and Hispanics were dying at twice the rate of white people. So is it possible that he and the racists in the Republican Party think, hey, COVID's a great way to reduce the population of blacks and Hispanics? Right now, Stephen Miller's doing everything he can to keep black and Hispanic people out of this country. Why not, go along with a few of them dying who are already here? That's one possibility. Another possibility has to do with FreedomWorks, the group that was largely raised to prominence by right-wing billionaires and helped fund the so-called Tea Party movement. The billionaires want their people back at work, whether it's a refinery like the Kochs, whether it's meat processing plants, whether it's retail stores, restaurant. They want their people back to work, making them money. And if some of those workers get sick and die, hey, there's an unending stream. You got 40 million unemployed Americans. There's an unending stream of people willing to work for crap wages at jobs that might kill them. A third possibility is that Trump simply loves the idea of people dying. I mean, this is the most bizarre of all the possibilities, but it appears to be a characteristic shared by strongman governments around the world, from Duterte in the Philippines, who told the police in the Philippines, just kill drug users, just shoot them in the head, to Jair Bolsonaro down in Brazil, who is like, oh, we're killing indigenous people in the Amazon? Well, life is tough. I mean, CNN is calling what's happening in the United States right now, they use this phrase several times this morning, including on their chyrons, apocalyptic levels of coronavirus infections. So given that we have apocalyptic levels of coronavirus, wouldn't it be a good idea to know why Donald Trump is so enthusiastic about Americans dying? Somebody over on Facebook, well, actually also on Twitter, I saw this in both places. I tweeted about this morning, and the article is both an op-ed basically saying what I'm telling you right now, is both on buzzflash.com and over at commondreams.org, asking why. And one person, or a couple of people, have suggested, he wants it to be a terrible mess in November so that people will be, afraid to vote. Why did he refuse to let America use the World Health Organization coronavirus kit in January, February, March, and to this day? Why? Why did he spend 2 months denying the obvious fact that this virus was real, that it was coming to the United States, that it was deadly, and that we were totally and utterly unprepared? Why did he refuse to set a good example for Americans by wearing a face mask? Is he more concerned about smearing his makeup than the death of 200,000 Americans? Why did he order his goons to intercept shipments of personal protective equipment and ventilators going to blue states? Where's all that equipment that he hijacked? Does he plan to offer it exclusively to red state governors? Is all this death just about politics? Why did he shut down, or why is he shutting down testing sites in multiple states next week after bragging at his Tulsa rally that he told his people to slow down the testing? Is it possible he's trying to let things get so bad that if he can roll out a vaccine in October, it will be his October surprise? Is that why the vaccine companies have gotten billions of federal dollars in what Trump calls Operation Warp Speed, while rural hospitals across the country continue to close? I mean, Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister were doing their work just after the Civil War, and they taught us how to deal with infectious diseases. Why has Trump worked so hard to convince his followers to ignore 200 years of medical science? And what is it about right-wing leaders embracing death by pandemic? I mean, if Trump was the only leader in the world doing this, it might make it easier to figure out. But wealthy oligarchs who have taken over countries around the world are doing the same thing. Why do these leaders want their people to die? Why does Trump want more Americans to die? Frankly, and we just touched on this in the most surface fashion, I think, in some ways, with Dr. Frank, some brilliant insights. But this is a multidimensional, multifactorial issue here, and there's so much evidence all over the ground. Now the governor of West Virginia, Jim Justice, same deal. He just fired his public health director because she's saying, oh, look, we've got some people dead from coronavirus. Oh, you can't talk about that. What the hell is going on here?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls on the other side of this break.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters-slaves, feudalism had lords-serfs, and monarchy had king-subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, But inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
This week on The Science Revolution, about that happiness. Is it time to stop being so careful? Is spontaneity the key to happiness? Professor Janice Brainy is here on plastic rain pouring down in our national parks and everywhere. Tony Corbo with Food and Water Watch drops by to warn Americans the USDA is trying to outsource chicken processing to China and what that means. Tune in wherever you find fine podcasts. You heard the news. So Donald Trump is sitting in the White House right now, rage tweeting Fox News. Honest to God, it's like he puts into play this program, as it were, to kill hundreds of thousands of Americans. And then he sits back and watches on TV to see how it's doing. And then somebody on Fox says something that isn't quite good enough for him. And he's like, oh, my God, look at that. People are responding, by the way, to his tweets going, it's 11 o'clock in the morning and on a Thursday, and you're in the White House watching TV and rage tweeting. We've never, ever seen a president do this. I mean, isn't there work to do? On the other hand, maybe we don't want him at work. Maybe we don't want him doing it. But, it's so. Let me just put a punctuation mark, and then I'll pick up your calls here on my rant from the previous hour. Hawaii is the only majority-minority state in the United States. Only 25% of the Hawaiian population is white. Hawaii has also succeeded in stopping the virus. They did it with quarantining people who were sick. They did it with testing. They did it with contact tracing. And they did it with basically saying no more flights into Hawaii until we get this thing under control. And they put that quarantine into place in March. And as of right now, Hawaii has 17 deaths and 819 confirmed cases. That's nothing. The city of Portland has more than that. So Hawaii has this great success, and so what is the Trump Justice Department doing? They are joining a lawsuit in federal court to say, Hawaii, you can't do that. You have to let everybody in regardless. You have to just open your doors back up and start those flights again. Because some billionaire who owns a ranch in Hawaii but lives on the continental United States is upset that he can't go to his ranch in Hawaii. Well, I mean, I suppose he could charter his own private jet. I don't know. Maybe they're stopping them. Over in West Virginia, Governor Jim Justice has kicked out the state's Bureau of Public Health Commissioner Kathy Schlempp. Now, she's she's an actual very competent public health professional. She's on the board of scientific counselors at the Centers for Disease Control. She was the founding director of West Virginia's Public Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Program. She was the state health officer. She was until today the head of the state's Bureau of Public Health, the commissioner. And what did she do that so upset Jim Justice, the coal mining billionaire Republican governor of West Virginia, who refuses to say that people should wear masks in public? What did she do? She said, oh, look it, we've got, here are our death numbers in West Virginia. And they're actually quite low right now. But she came out and said, here's what we've got. We've got 2,600 positive cases, 92 COVID deaths in West Virginia. And he's like, oh, no, well, we don't, nope. You're figuring it wrong. And finally, meanwhile, the Mount Rushmore area of South Dakota, of course, very densely populated in the region by Lakota Sioux. This was sacred Lakota Sioux land that was stolen from them by the federal government to carve Mount Rushmore. People have been talking about, do we need to change Mount Rushmore now? Kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's made it into some of the left-wing tongue-in-cheek comments, and maybe some of them not so tongue-in-cheek, have made it over to the right-wing rageosphere. So Donald Trump watching Fox News has heard about this. And Donald Trump reading the right-wing, rage sites heard about this. And so now he's announcing massive fireworks display on July 3rd in South Dakota at Mount Rushmore. Even though Mount Rushmore banned this starting in 2010 because global warming is causing their fire season, their summers, to be very dry and very dangerous for things like fireworks displays. But Trump is doing it, and they have announced no social distancing requirements, no masks necessary. What the hell is going on? I mean, this is bizarre is not quite the right, is not quite a strong enough word. Cassandra in Camas. Hey, Cassandra, your thoughts on this?
Thank you. My thoughts. It's not as simple as what I'm about to say. It's obviously there's a lot of years of very messed up background for Trump to make what we now see. But I think he has a demigod, or not even demi. I think he has a full-blown sociopathic God complex. The man literally does not care about the deaths. This is not an issue for him. It's not that he's actively going after killing people. He literally doesn't care. It is not even a thought in his mind. What is a thought in his mind is, I want this, I want that. I dominate because I am the God. And as the God, little purple, orange God, I think, he expects all of his words to be taken instantly, respected, feared, approved, everything. He just does not comprehend anyone else's viewpoint. Not his children's, not his grandchildren, not anyone that he doesn't know. He doesn't care about those that serve him, McConnell or anyone else. Barr, no, none of these people truly matter to him. What matters is, as long as you are of use to Donald Trump, he will keep you near him. You will do his bidding, and therefore the world goes on. When you do not do his bidding, he becomes vicious, he becomes destructive, and he wants to prove the point that you cannot come up against me. I dominate. Domination is his entire agenda, regardless of where he is in life. Before the presidency, after the presidency, it is domination in this man's world. If something fails, it's not his fault. Those who supported him failed him. Therefore, he didn't dominate enough. Okay, got to dominate harder. That's all this man, I think, is about. And he thinks
I think you're largely right, Cassandra, and I think that comports with what Dr. Justin Frank was saying, a little bit ago, that, he didn't feel loved. He felt like he was out of control in his childhood. And how do you gain control? You dominate everything around you. You become an absolute, total control freak. And, so what we're watching here is a childhood psychopathology being played out on the world stage with 122,000 dead Americans and probably another 100,000, maybe as many as 200,000 to die between now and the election. Certainly between now and January when Trump hopefully will have to leave office. So
I would say he is a modern Nero, and Rome is burning, and he is our modern Nero. And Nero cared about no one, and that is who he is.
And do you remember when Trump retweeted somebody had made a graphic, a meme of Trump playing the violin, and he retweeted it with a caption saying, "I don't know what this means, but I like it." And it was an obvious reference to Nero and Rome.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. Cassandra, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Well said. Steve in Phoenix. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, good morning there, Tom. I want to talk about, expound on Cassandra's viewpoints. I think they're spot on. But I'd like to make an observation here. Yesterday we had a plumber here, and he says he's gone into some people's homes here in Phoenix, and the people refuse to wear masks. He then says he has to leave because he says, I've had 2 family members die, so that's how bad it is here. Oh, and one other thing, too. It's been 100. It's terrible. That's terrible. It's been 112 in Phoenix here for a long time. Trump said it was going to die out, the virus. How hot does it have to get for it to die? you know?
400 degrees maybe?
yeah. But anyways, getting back to Donald here, or the legal occupant of the White House, every decision he's made, it seems like, since he came to power, basically benefits Russia and to some degree China, And I think he's Putin's influence, due to monetary issues. And Putin, he's got a big axe to grind with the U.S. because he blames us for the dissolution of the USSR, and he wants to see us diminished. So everywhere in the world, everything. Look in Turkey when we pulled out, we exposed the Kurds. He's got access to Syria's deep water port there. Just everything, and all these Americans dying, pulling out of all these other treaties and stuff. All it does is ramp up Russia, to make them look good,
And the number one thing that helped bring down the Soviet Union, in my humble opinion, having lived in Germany on the East German border for a year back in the 80s, was Voice of America. Voice of America was broadcasting in German into East Germany and in Russian into the Soviet Union, among others. And look at what Trump just decapitated. He just sent one of his right-wing goons in, and they fired the head of the Voice. Trump replaced the head of the Voice, the entire network with this guy, and then this guy fired the heads of all the various broadcasting facilities.
Man, I never realized that.
Yeah, it is incredible, and that was the Voice of America was the main reason, in my opinion, why the Soviet Union fell, because they got to hear what the rest of the world was up to. Steve, thank you for the call. We'll be back 45 minutes past the hour. Political donors linked to China won access to Trump and the Republican Party. That's the headline over at the Wall Street Journal right now.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So why is Trump so excited, so enthusiastic about 122,000 dead Americans, and he wants more? And welcome back. Kim in Sarasota. Hey, Kim, what's up?
Hey, I wanted to bring back the fact that Trump is the super narcissist, and he already has power. He already has money. He already has influence. The ultimate high for the ultimate narcissist is to lead people to death against their own God-given natural instincts. He's sending his own people, the Trump people, putting them at huge risk to themselves for his glory. And he doesn't care if they die. It's the fact that they are willing to be that stupid for him.
Yeah.
And
do you think, Kim, that there's an element of you guys were dumb enough to follow me, you're just getting what you deserve kind of thinking on Trump's part?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's truly, I think he thinks that these people love me so much they're willing to risk death to see me. That's what I
and he's going to make that happen, so he's going to force them to prove how much they love him.
He's not even forcing them. They're willingly coming. That makes him even more excited. He is controlling people's destinies, and he doesn't care who dies, left or right. He doesn't care. And I sit there and I watch this, and I'm going, why doesn't he care? Well, he doesn't. And I saw, I think John Oliver did a little thing on his family members responding to questions about their father. And Ivanka says, well, it's Donald first and everybody second, third, fourth, and fifth. Nobody counts but him. And, I have no feelings for the family at all. I'm sure they're quite screwed up. But it's just a reflection on the type of person he is. If you understand the type of person Trump is, you understand what he's doing. There is no why except for himself. It's all about him. He doesn't care if people die, as long as they die in his name, whether it's good news or bad news. So that's
it makes sense. It makes sense. Kim, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. It makes a lot of sense. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. How's it going?
Good.
First of all, I got to Cassandra must have been reading The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump there. She was quoting it almost exactly. It's scary. But something I had just read in the New York Times a little while ago was what's happening on college campuses and how the COVID is spreading among the football programs there. The worst one was Kansas State, where half of all the cases in Manhattan are coming right from the football team, and they're having issues in LSU and what was it also UCLA. So the whole thing with the spread of this virus is becoming more noticeable in places where we weren't thinking about recently. And now let's see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, and athletics, I mean, this is one of the big problems that all the athletic programs around the country have, including the professional athletic programs, is that most of these sports are referred to as contact sports, which means you have contact with other people, right? You run into people, you bang into them, you fall into them, you try to knock them over in football, things like that, and in the process, you're spreading disease to them. Yeah, Sean, spot on. Thank you very much for the call. It's 49 minutes past the hour, coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Randall in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hey, Randall, what's up?
Hi. I was just thinking about it, simply it's a scorched earth policy that he has, and he's only going to ramp up. It's kind of like the guy in Iraq, the same thing, burning all the oil fields, and I know that'll be his final. He's already heating the water up for it. But
so you think Saddam Hussein saw that he was probably going to be defeated, and he didn't want the oil fields to be available to the Americans, and so he set them on fire. You're saying that Trump knows that he's going to be defeated, and so he's metaphorically setting on fire his followers? Or just America in general?
Anything and everything. He doesn't care. It's going to be scorched earth, and he's going to. And in the meantime, I got a letter here from the HUD for my eligibility for my rent credit. And we sign, 4 or 5 different things for HUD when we certify every year. And now HUD wants us to sign something that lets them in all our information, including our Social Security numbers. And if I don't sign it, I lose the possibility of keeping my rent.
Wow, so you have subsidized housing, Randall, and now they're saying that they want to they want to give your information to for-profit companies? Is that the deal? I mean, what's HUD up to here? What's Ben Carson doing?
Basically, it does say there's a Privacy Act statement here, but they already have all the information. But now they're basically, it's a catch-22. They're asking for them to be able to look into all my records directly, not indirectly through the management here. Or
they're looking for people. This is under the rubric of stopping fraud. They're looking for people who might be who might have subsidized housing and yet have $1 million sitting in the bank someplace or something like that.
Yeah,
that's unfortunate.
They already have all the protections for that. This is just. I think this is a catch-22 where you're giving them permission, or Donald Trump permission, to scrutinize you, even more.
No, I got it. I got it. Randall, good luck. Good luck, and thank you for the call. Dale in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Dale, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? How you doing?
Good.
About the coronavirus, I heard President Trump say that President Obama didn't leave him anything to fight the virus with. Now, we know the Obama administration went over Yeah, I know it's a lie, but he said he went over the things that prepared them for the virus. They had a 60-some page plan for how they fight the virus. Now, I understand that President Obama couldn't get the stuff he needed because Congress wouldn't pass it. Mitch McConnell, the Senate rather, blocked it, wouldn't give him the funds. Now, if you, as Donald Trump, know it could be a virus, why didn't you not go to Mitch McConnell and say, look, I understand why you didn't give Obama the money. You don't like him. I don't either. But go ahead and give me the funds so I can get this stuff in place just in case they're telling the truth. Now, the fact that he didn't do that tells you everything you need to know because he could have done it. He's been president for 3 years. Now,
right. So why, Dale, did he not do it?
Well, I think he was so motivated to get millionaires a tax break that he didn't think about that. Yeah, his plan was to
so
first
you think
do
this
a
just
tax
kind of
break.
fell by the wayside?
Yeah, so he had other agendas, so that fell on the back burner. And then by the time he realized there was a problem, he didn't have the equipment in place to fight the virus. Tax break.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And meanwhile, go ahead.
Yes, tax break, deregulation of companies that pollute the air, the water, the food. All these things were first on his agenda. Getting rid of Obamacare. See, all these things was his top priority. So he forgot about the plan of the pandemic.
Yeah, and building his wall and deporting, people with brown skin and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, Dale, spot on. And watching Fox News. He's got to have, 6-8 hours a day of watching Fox News. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to say, I think as an African-American, I think a lot of this is about race and politics. You were talking earlier about how the way we look at this virus kind of changed after all the reports came out about how it was disproportionately affecting
after April
communities
7th.
of color. And I keep thinking about, what Lee Atwater said back in the day about dog whistle politics and about how at the end of the day, it's about hurting blacks get hurt worse than whites. And I think a lot of this does that. I mean, you look at Trump's whole campaign in 2016 was about race and immigration, and you look at all the voter suppression that's going on. I mean, I think a lot of this is about, race. And, Stephen Miller is his chief advisor. And, we know all about him and how he views race and immigration. So, it doesn't surprise – nothing surprises me with this guy, but I think a lot of this is about race and politics.
I think you're right, Kevin, and I think one of the big pieces of evidence of that is Trump's the selectivity of who Trump goes after. He is married to an immigrant. He has been married to 2 immigrants. He is married to an immigrant whose family came to the United States and got U.S. citizenship through, quote, chain migration. And then he goes out and just nakedly attacks immigrants and chain migration. And you would, a rational person would say, but wait a minute, what about your wife and her parents? And his answer is, I mean, he's not saying it out loud, but the answer is they're white people, I mean, that's, so it doesn't count.
He wanted more people. He said he wanted more people coming from Norway.
That's right. In his S-hole country comment, he said, why are we getting people from these S-hole countries? I want more people from Norway. You're absolutely right, Kevin. Kevin, yeah, it's not like it's a secret. It's hiding in plain sight. Kevin, thank you for the call, and thank you for listening to us on Progressive Voices. It's coming up on the top of the hour here. Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by in the next hour. We're going to be talking about the fate and future of the dollar, the economy, this debt bomb that is fixing to go off in front of our face, all kinds of stuff. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. Specifically, it's over at thomhartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, et cetera, not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters, not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Pat Mitchell. It's titled Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World. This is from the preface titled The Most Dangerous Woman in the Room. Yes, I'll be there. Eve Ensler was calling with an invitation to what she described as the meeting of movements, planned for the first week of January 2017. In the wake of a polarizing presidential election in the United States, Eve had decided it was time for activists to come together to shape strategies that would unify and leverage the collective power of a wide range of social justice organizations. Who else is coming, I asked. I'm not releasing the invitation list, Eve replied, but you'll want to be in the room. Indeed, I did want to be in that room, knowing from past experiences that any meeting or event that Eve organized would be meaningful. So I showed up, as the invitation indicated, at a nondescript building in Stone Ridge, New York, and surrendered my cell phone to the smiling young volunteers at the front door. Best to have all communication devices outside the room, was the explanation, which of course heightened my anticipation about what would transpire within the room. I entered a large room and saw Eve standing at the front with folding chairs in a circle. Mingling about the room were some familiar faces, the meeting's other conveners, Kimberly Crenshaw of the African American Policy Forum, Naomi Klein, award-winning author and activist, independent media entrepreneur and journalist Laura Flanders, and Jane Fonda, actor and activist. We were asked to find our seats, and Eve began. "We are living in dangerous times," was her opening line, and such times call for new levels of activism from all the communities represented in this room. Let's begin by identifying who's in the room. One by one, the introductions began. I'm one of the founders of the Women's March. I'm the executive director of 350.org. I run Project South. With each introduction, the level of leadership and activists' credentials became more impressive and, for me, more intimidating. I could feel my anxiety building. How was I going to identify myself? I have no title and was no longer running an organization, having left my CEO position at the Paley Center for Media the previous spring. I could say that I was the CEO of Pat Mitchell Media with its grand total of 2 employees, including myself, but that felt wholly inadequate to explain why I belonged in that room. I mentally rehearsed some other options. I could say I was a lifetime advocate for women, true enough if a little vague. I could list some of my previous titles, but why make a point of being the former anything? I was struggling to come up with how to identify myself in the present, an identity that would hopefully give some indication of why Eve had included me in this circle of activists and leaders. Finally, it was my turn. Before I knew it, I heard myself saying, "I'm Pat Mitchell, and I'm a dangerous woman." I'm not sure exactly what prompted this personal declaration of dangerousness, but I could tell from the looks of surprise that I needed to add a bit more context. At this time in my life, about to turn 75, I continued, I have nothing left to prove, less to lose, and I'm ready to take more risks and to be less politic and polite. As Eve said, these are dangerous times, and dangerous times call for dangerous women. That got a big sisterly yes from Eve and others in the circle, including Jane Fonda, who was sitting across from me, and stood up declaring, "Well, I'm older than my friend Pat, so that makes me even more dangerous." Laughter erupted, of course, and I could sense that others were contemplating exactly what becoming more dangerous to meet the challenges of dangerous times would mean for each of us and for the work we had convened to consider. Certainly, Jane Fonda's life of activism is a textbook case for being bold and brave. During our many years of friendship, I've witnessed her willingness to take risks for a good cause, to speak out and show up, even when it meant personal peril or sacrifice. At 81, she is still on the front lines, campaigning for domestic and restaurant workers' rights, standing with the American Indian communities, protesting natural resource exploitation at Standing Rock, and busier as an actor than ever. In her book, Prime Time, Jane advanced the idea that older women have the potential to become the most powerful population on the planet. She's a great example of how we embrace that potential at every age. My personal potential for becoming dangerous is perhaps more directly linked to my friendship with Eve Ensler. From our first conversation in war-torn Sarajevo in 1998, I've been deeply inspired by her courage and her commitment to do whatever is necessary to end violence against women everywhere. Taking risks comes easier to Eve than to many. Writing and performing the vagina monologues, making it the centerpiece of a global movement, V-Day, to end gender-based violence, is a transformative approach to activism that I feel privileged to have experienced. Yes, I was an activist and women's advocate before I met Eve, but through my relationship with her and as a board member of the V-Day movement, I've met activists facing dangers every day to create change in some of the most difficult places on earth to be a woman. But until that day, I had not felt dangerous myself. Declaring myself a dangerous woman still feels a bit, well, dangerous. And I readily admit to some second thoughts about declaring it even more widely and boldly as the title of this book. But every day since that convening, I'm discovering more about what being dangerous means in my life and why I believe that it's time for us, women and the men who stand with us, at whatever age or place in life's journey, to embrace risks and engage with renewed passion and collective purpose in making the world a safer place for women and girls. Pat Mitchell, Becoming a Dangerous Woman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. There is a bomb waiting to go off, deeply embedded in our financial system. Corporate debt is at an all-time high. Personal debt is at an all-time high as well. Banksters are now doing with mortgages back in 2008, what they were doing with mortgages that blew up our economy. They're doing that now with corporate debt. And, packaging it, slicing and dicing it, and selling it off as AAA rated investments when none of the debt in it is even A rated. Is this going to blow up in our face? Not to mention the fact that everybody's predicting that there's a huge wave of corporate bankruptcies, particularly small and medium-sized companies, coming down the road in a matter of months when all this federal support runs out. What the hell is going on? Where is this going to lead us? Professor Richard Wolff is with us, the economist and co-founder of Democracy at Work, the author of numerous books. His most recent, Understanding Socialism. DemocracyAtWork.info is the website. He also, his personal website, rdwolff.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff with 2 Fs or at democracy@WRK. Professor Wolff, welcome back. Your thoughts on what's the state of debt and I also saw a piece that I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal this morning saying that worldwide debt has now exceeded 100% of GDP. What's going on?
Well, I think you're seeing, and I hesitate to say it, but it has to be said, I think you're seeing the unraveling of a system. I'm a critic of capitalism, so I could, I suppose, say I told you so. I take no pleasure in it at all, but I think that's what you're seeing. So let me explain. The crash of 2008 and 9 is called the Great Recession because it was, at that time, the second worst crash of capitalism in its history after the Great Depression of the 1930s. One of the major ways that the United States government tried in panic in those last 4 months of 2008 to deal with it was by pumping huge amounts of money into the economy, which continued in 2009 and 10, and dropping interest rates to unprecedented lows. Here we are, 11 years later, 10 years later, depending on how you count. And what do we got? Another crash of capitalism. But this one has within it, and on top of it, the scars from the last one. What do I mean? When you drop interest rates to virtually zero in the aftermath of 2008, you are sending an invitation to every corporation, every business in the United States, and similar things happened elsewhere, but particularly here. The invitation is, whatever problem your company has, whatever difficulty you've encountered, you now know that the easiest, quickest, and cheapest way to deal with your problem is to go borrow virtually free money. Money that you can get from the banks and ultimately from the Federal Reserve at 1%, 1.5%, 2%, way less than ever before. To the surprise of no one, the corporate sector in America, business, borrowed money over the last decade beyond anything anyone had ever seen before. Good companies, bad companies, and all in between, loaded up on this free money to solve whatever problem they had. And of course, since it's capitalism, amongst these companies were crooks and hustlers and speculators of all kinds who also, of course, took advantage of the low-cost money, borrowing for very dubious and highly risky investments. They all could keep going unless and until something happened to bring us kind of sharply up against the fact that the underlying businesses that had borrowed weren't in a position to repay. We would have had that in the crash that began in February of this year, the downturn of capitalism, which is normal. But if this one is not only bad, but on top of it, the pandemic, now we have the great danger that many, many businesses will go out, and therefore the arrangement that we can handle a few bankruptcies is now threatened by a more wholesale declaration of inability to pay, and that is even bigger because of all this borrowing than what we saw back in 2008. Bottom line, nothing was learned. The same or parallel games were played, and we are now living out the risks that flowed from the way we panicked and responded in 2008.
So I absolutely get that, and I share your critique of capitalism. The system, however, is probably not going to change in the next few years, at least not in any big consequential way. I'm wondering if, I mean, we used to regulate debt in the United States. I believe it was Richard Nixon who did away with federal usury laws. Prior to the early 1970s, it was illegal to charge more than 10% interest. He blew that off. And as I recall, the ability of banks or any third party to buy and tranche and resell debt, as we saw with CDOs, with the real estate market in 2008, as we're seeing now with collateralized loan obligations, CLOs, with the corporate debt market. The ability to do that was illegal prior to the Reagan administration. I mean, this all came about as a consequence of this great experiment of Reaganism, did it not? Isn't it? I mean, aren't there some things that we can do to mitigate the damage and the danger going forward?
Yeah, it's just we're a little bit of, closing the barn door after all the livestock have left. At this point, we are facing, let me give you an example that sort of answers your questions. In the months of April and May, we now know a little under half of all commercial establishments did not pay their rent to whoever their landlord was. The building in which their store was located, the mall in which their store was located. Half. That is a spectacular default, much greater than the population or the working class people not paying rent on their apartments is the commercial enterprises who didn't. Okay, The landlords are therefore screwed in this arrangement. What do? The landlords inform the banks in the United States, from whom they've borrowed to build the mall, to own the building, and so on, that they can't pay off their debts to the banks because as landlords they're not getting the rents upon which they depend. So the landlords are hiring lawyers to threaten eviction to the tenants. The bankers are hiring lawyers to go to court against the landlords. This is a system, and I don't mean this rhetorically, I mean it in empirical detail. The system is falling apart. None of the normal lease arrangements, none of the normal handshake obligations, recognized bills paid, that's not happening anymore. That's a complete disintegration of what normally holds a society together. So I think you're right. We can't just keep talking about capitalism, but in a sense, I don't have to anymore, because the immediate realities that businesses and individuals face, 42 million on getting unemployment, court cases filling up with God knows how many evictions of both commercial and household tenants. This is the kind of thing that happens when empires fall apart, and I suspect it is of a seriousness that really will put the system as a whole into question a lot sooner than any of us thought.
Yeah, remarkable stuff. Professor Wolff, it's always so great talking with you. Thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thank you, Tom.
Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, and his most recent book, Understanding Socialism, rdwolff.com. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, do you think that our economy is going to survive? And frankly, if Joe Biden becomes president, or anybody, I mean, can we fix this? And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, just about your question in the top of the hour about why Trump would be willing to kill all these thousands of Americans. The answer came out of his own mouth when he said that he could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and nobody would mind. For a megalomaniac like Trump, having a great big death toll and then prevailing in spite of it is sort of like heaven come true. Another part of Trump's mindset is that he is an essentially antagonistic character. There are a lot of people like this who are never satisfied unless they're getting negative attention by making people hate them. And that's what he was as a kid. That's why he went to military school. That's why he carried a deadly weapon, which by the manhood standards of the day was a real disgrace. It was something bad that would get him attention, and that's what the COVID virus
what you're describing is, what you're describing, Mike, is called oppositional defiant disorder, and you're arguing. It sounds to me like Trump is actually delighting in the death of all these Americans. I know Lyndon Johnson. Those of us who were in the streets in the '60s protesting Lyndon Johnson believed that he was delighting in the death of American soldiers in Vietnam. We now know from the historical record that he was tortured by it. He would frequently break into tears. He was praying with his wife about this situation. It was a terrible, Vietnam was a terrible thing for Lyndon Johnson. And, but Trump is, he's killed twice as many people as Lyndon Johnson did.
Yes, but I don't think it's a matter of his delighting in the deaths so much as it is in his delighting over doing something which should have sunk him and still prevailing, as he did all the way through his political campaign.
He's able to say that he got away with it. He's thumbing his nose at us.
Absolutely. He's a lifelong con man who always had contempt for the people he hoodwinked and delighted in his own great brilliance in hoodwinking them. And COVID-19 is just another opportunity to do it on a big scale.
Yeah, he beat the rubes. Makes perfect sense. Thanks, Mike. Good to hear from you. Jessica in Hinsdale, Illinois. Hey, Jessica, what's up? Hinsdale.
Hi, Tom. With the COVID-19, I believe it started out as racism, not caring. But now that he has no regard for anyone, including his base, he just doesn't care about human life. But some of the base isn't having it. But I also wanted to answer one of your questions, too. I believe Trump will be in survival mode when he realizes it's the point he's going down. I believe he'll fly off to either South America, Russia, or Turkey, and I don't think we'll know where he went. And he'll be out there, and I don't think...
How about Slovenia? His wife and his son both have dual citizenship with Slovenia.
Yes, I don't.
And his son speaks Slovenian.
Oh, yes. I don't think he wants to serve one day in prison.
Yeah, I'm sure of that. Although he may figure that he can hold it off, with constant lawsuits and fighting back. I mean, he's been fighting off, attempts to throw him in jail or hold him accountable for years and years and years. We'll see. We'll see. Jessica, thank you for the call.
He's murdered too many people.
Yeah. Jessica, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour.
Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. It is the 12 steps. Common Cause actually put these together, but I boiled them down into a nice little rant on a YouTube video that you can share with friends and neighbors and acquaintances who might be wondering, how did this coronavirus thing get so bad? Why is it that the United States has a third of the deaths in the world? Why do we have over 100,000 dead people, and South Korea has 200, and Taiwan has like 70, and Australia has fewer than 100, and has pretty much squashed the virus? Why is it that only 7 people died in New Zealand? Why are so many other countries doing so well and we're not? Well, there's an answer to that question, and I lay it out in this little video. It's over at thomhartmann.com, and you can grab it there and share it with your friends. And I'll give you a clue. Almost all of it has to do with things that orange guy in the White House either did or failed to do, but it's a great list. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A couple of other things that I wanted to bring to your attention and just, toss on the table here. Austria, the country of Austria. This is a country where Hitler was born. It abuts Germany. Everybody in Austria speaks German. It's kind of Germany. Anyway, Austria and Germany are kind of joined at the hip. Austria. Germany has got this comprehensive contact tracing and comprehensive testing, and Angela Merkel went all in. And she stopped the coronavirus in Germany. They just had an outbreak a couple days ago in Germany in a meat processing plant, and the owner of the plant came out on media, on television, and apologized to the community, apologized to his employees, shut down the plant, everybody is getting tested. They're just like, it's such the opposite of what's going on here. But the next country over, Austria, they did not do the they're doing some testing and contact tracing, but nothing like Germany. The one thing that Austria did, and they did it very early, they did this back in March, early March, is they mandated that everybody in the country must wear a mask at all times. Austria did that I said March. They did that on April 6th. The two countries that did it in March were the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So we have 3 countries that in March and April said, everybody in the country, you must wear a mask. And that was pretty much the major effort that they did. So, hey, we've got a control group, which is the United States, no masks. A semi-control group, the rest of Europe, sometimes masks, sometimes not. And then you got these 3 countries, Slovakia, Czech Republic,
and Austria, where you must wear a mask when you go out, period. If you don't, you will get a fine. You will get a ticket, basically, a traffic ticket. And guess what? Austria has bent the curve. Just wearing masks dropped their coronavirus cases by 90%. They were getting 90 cases per million people. Now they're getting 10 cases per million. And it's been that way ever since 2 weeks after April 6th. In the Czech Republic and Slovenia, in Czechoslovakia, they got 63 Czechs per 100,000 infected. Fewer than 2 per 100,000 are dying. In Slovakia, it's 21 per 100,000, and just 0.2% out of 100,000 have died. Contrast that with Great Britain, where it's 182 out of 100,000 infected and 25 out of 100,000 having died. And the numbers are similar here in the United States. So just mask wearing. I told you a couple days ago about these 2 COVID-infected hairdressers at this beauty salon in Missouri. When they opened up, these 2 people, who both had active cases of COVID, served over 140 people before they melted down and got so sick they couldn't work anymore. And then they contact traced those 140 people, and none of them got it. Why? Because that hair salon required not only their hairstylists, but their customers to wear masks. Everybody. Meanwhile, there is concern in Donald Trump's inner circle that he's pushing the FDA to certify a vaccine for COVID in October, whether it works or not, so that people will get the vaccine, they'll think everything's good, they'll go back to work in the last couple of weeks of October. It won't be until the middle of November or late November that we see the explosion in cases as a result of this if the vaccine doesn't work. But hey, that's after the election. And there'll be a big economic boom and all this kind of stuff. This Tom McCarthy, writing in The Guardian, concerns that Donald Trump's inner circle might pressure the Food and Drug Administration to rush a coronavirus vaccine to market in time for the presidential election have risen after the White House attacked the agency for reversing itself on experimental drug treatment. Their early blanket approval of ineffective antibody tests. I mean, here's the thing. Zeke Emanuel, he says, the worry here is that they'll use the emergency use authorization standard. In other words, they will say, oh, we've got some vaccines. We don't know if it's going to cause the, Guillain-Barré syndrome or something like that, like the swine flu did, the vaccines did back during when Jerry Ford rushed them out back in the 70s. And people got this neurological disease that crippled them for the rest of their lives. Well, we didn't even know that was a possibility until after a few million people had been vaccinated. Thousands of these cases started popping up. But Zeke Emanuel says, if you give it to the people and they think, wow, I've got the vaccine now, they're likely not to physical distance or wear face masks. And if that doesn't work, we've got a disaster on our hands. Right. But Trump gets reelected. So is it possible that the reason he's trying to get all these people dead right now, or trying to make, this forest fire even worse, is not, what we thought before, it's got something to do with herd immunity? No, it's not that at all. That he actually wants it to be a screaming, flaming, horrific, hair on fire disaster so that in October he can roll out his vaccine and get reelected on the basis that he saved America. What do you think?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the rest of us.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Pat Mitchell. It's titled Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World. This is from the preface titled The Most Dangerous Woman in the Room. Yes, I'll be there. Eve Ensler was calling with an invitation to what she described as the meeting of movements, planned for the first week of January 2017. In the wake of a polarizing presidential election in the United States, Eve had decided it was time for activists to come together to shape strategies that would unify and leverage the collective power of a wide range of social justice organizations. Who else is coming, I asked. I'm not releasing the invitation list, Eve replied, but you'll want to be in the room. Indeed, I did want to be in that room, knowing from past experiences that any meeting or event that Eve organized would be meaningful. So I showed up, as the invitation indicated, at a nondescript building in Stone Ridge, New York, and surrendered my cell phone to the smiling young volunteers at the front door. Best to have all communication devices outside the room, was the explanation, which of course heightened my anticipation about what would transpire within the room. I entered a large room and saw Eve standing at the front with folding chairs in a circle. Mingling about the room were some familiar faces, the meeting's other conveners, Kimberly Crenshaw of the African American Policy Forum, Naomi Klein, award-winning author and activist, independent media entrepreneur and journalist Laura Flanders, and Jane Fonda, actor and activist. We were asked to find our seats, and Eve began. "We are living in dangerous times," was her opening line, and such times call for new levels of activism from all the communities represented in this room. Let's begin by identifying who's in the room. One by one, the introductions began. I'm one of the founders of the Women's March. I'm the executive director of 350.org. I run Project South. With each introduction, the level of leadership and activists' credentials became more impressive and, for me, more intimidating. I could feel my anxiety building. How was I going to identify myself? I have no title and was no longer running an organization, having left my CEO position at the Paley Center for Media the previous spring. I could say that I was the CEO of Pat Mitchell Media with its grand total of 2 employees, including myself, but that felt wholly inadequate to explain why I belonged in that room. I mentally rehearsed some other options. I could say I was a lifetime advocate for women, true enough if a little vague. I could list some of my previous titles, but why make a point of being the former anything? I was struggling to come up with how to identify myself in the present, an identity that would hopefully give some indication of why Eve had included me in this circle of activists and leaders. Finally, it was my turn. Before I knew it, I heard myself saying, "I'm Pat Mitchell, and I'm a dangerous woman." I'm not sure exactly what prompted this personal declaration of dangerousness, but I could tell from the looks of surprise that I needed to add a bit more context. At this time in my life, about to turn 75, I continued, I have nothing left to prove, less to lose, and I'm ready to take more risks and to be less politic and polite. As Eve said, these are dangerous times, and dangerous times call for dangerous women. That got a big sisterly yes from Eve and others in the circle, including Jane Fonda, who was sitting across from me, and stood up declaring, "Well, I'm older than my friend Pat, so that makes me even more dangerous." Laughter erupted, of course, and I could sense that others were contemplating exactly what becoming more dangerous to meet the challenges of dangerous times would mean for each of us and for the work we had convened to consider. Certainly, Jane Fonda's life of activism is a textbook case for being bold and brave. During our many years of friendship, I've witnessed her willingness to take risks for a good cause, to speak out and show up, even when it meant personal peril or sacrifice. At 81, she is still on the front lines, campaigning for domestic and restaurant workers' rights, standing with the American Indian communities, protesting natural resource exploitation at Standing Rock, and busier as an actor than ever. In her book, Prime Time, Jane advanced the idea that older women have the potential to become the most powerful population on the planet. She's a great example of how we embrace that potential at every age. My personal potential for becoming dangerous is perhaps more directly linked to my friendship with Eve Ensler. From our first conversation in war-torn Sarajevo in 1998, I've been deeply inspired by her courage and her commitment to do whatever is necessary to end violence against women everywhere. Taking risks comes easier to Eve than to many. Writing and performing the Vagina Monologues, making it the centerpiece of a global movement, V-Day, to end gender-based violence, is a transformative approach to activism that I feel privileged to have experienced. Yes, I was an activist and woman's advocate before I met Eve, but through my relationship with her and as a board member of the V-Day movement, I've met activists facing dangers every day to create change in some of the most difficult places on earth to be a woman. But until that day, I had not felt dangerous myself. Declaring myself a dangerous woman still feels a bit, well, dangerous. And I readily admit to some second thoughts about declaring it even more widely and boldly as the title of this book. But every day since that convening, I'm discovering more about what being dangerous means in my life and why I believe that it's time for us, women and the men who stand with us, at whatever age or place in life's journey, to embrace risks and engage with renewed passion and collective purpose in making the world a safer place for women and girls. Pat Mitchell, Becoming a Dangerous Woman.
It's Memorial Day. We memorialize the Americans who have died in our wars, in the Vietnam War, in the Iraq War, in the Afghanistan War, in the Gulf War, the earlier Iraq War, in the Korean War. If you add all of those wars together that I just named, the sum total of them is fewer than the number of people who have died in 3 months from COVID-19 virus on Donald Trump's watch. Isn't it time for us to memorialize the Americans who have died and are continuing to die at the rate of, well over 1,000 a day as a result of the incompetence of Donald Trump? It seems like maybe it's a good idea. Maybe it's the time to add COVID-19 victims. Because, after all, Trump says we're warriors, or maybe there should be a separate holiday. But something to think about. You'll find a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. This week on The Science Revolution, about that happiness. Is it time to stop being so careful? Is spontaneity the key to happiness? Professor Janice Brainy is here on plastic rain pouring down in our national parks and everywhere. Tony Corbo with Food and Water Watch drops by to warn Americans the USDA is trying to outsource chicken processing to China and what that means. Tune in wherever you find fine podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us is our old buddy Greg Palast, the investigative journalist for the BBC, The Guardian, Rolling Stone, etc. His new book, How Trump Stole 2020, The Hunt for America's Vanished Voters. The book will be out in a week or three, and but you can pre-order it at wherever fine books are available. GregPalast.com is his website. His Twitter handle, Greg_Palast. Greg, first of all, welcome back, my friend. And secondly, what's the latest that you're hearing about the primaries that we're seeing with these long line primaries from Georgia, on to yesterday? We saw the same thing in Kentucky, around the country. These long line primaries being translated into a disaster in November. What's going on?
Yeah, I would say so. We had a pretty good imitation of democracy, but we're still a long way from the real thing. So we had massive lines, and we have to ask why. And by the way, look at the color of the people in the massive lines, Tom. Right. In Atlanta, one of my associates actually walked along a line that was nearly a quarter-mile long. Now, if you think people and African Americans in Atlanta just don't have enough sense to stay out of a line of sick people for hours and just enjoy standing in the sun for hours, the answer is that's not what happened. You really did have
Greg, I got to tell you,
with the mail-in ballots, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I lived in Georgia for 13 years. We lived in Cobb County, and the northern Atlanta suburbs. We lived for about half that time in Marietta, and about half that time just north of Marietta. And I never waited more than 10 minutes to vote, ever. These were mostly
you
white
aren't by
suburbs.
any chance a white man, are you?
Exactly.
Yeah, if there's one set of lines for black people, one set of lines for white. And one of the reasons it happens, you've had them in so many of these states, and this was and I've gotten reports. Interestingly, I've had 3 of the top voting rights attorneys in America say that either they or their family had trouble voting. So, for example, in Georgia, the head of the ACLU of Georgia, Andrea Young, put in for a mail-in ballot 45 days before the election. She got hers, but her husband got his on June 10. In other words, a day after the election, that's when he received his ballot. So, of course, he had to then stand in line for hours and end up with a provisional ballot and fight over that one. Same thing with Stacey Abrams. Now, here's a good one. I think that it's a bit humid in Georgia in June, right? And so Stacey Abrams, who is, Fair Fight Georgia, we've talked about, African-American. So she gets her ballot, and the envelope that you have to return the vote in is sealed shut because in Georgia, they were using the regular envelopes, and the humidity sealed the envelope. You rip open that envelope, you have no choice, you've just lost your vote. Now, Stacey Abrams
you've tampered with the delivery system for returning it.
That's right, and a lot of people, and this is going to be a big problem with mail-in voting. Now, I want people to understand, Greg Palast is totally in favor of mail-in voting, safe, don't die voting. What I am concerned about is that we don't have that system developed in the United States, and in most places outside of Oregon and Washington, we have tremendous problems. So, again, Stacey Abrams got a ballot with the return envelope sealed. She breaks that, and she loses her vote. Now, she knows that because she's a top voting rights attorney, so she knew that she would have to go to her county office and get a new envelope, believe it or not. But there are thousands and thousands of people who will, for all kinds of reasons, they'll lose that envelope, and they'll make their own envelope. You're going to lose your vote. Hundreds of thousands of voters lose their mail-in votes because they created their own envelope or they messed up the envelope in some way. You have to use that official envelope. That was Stacey Abrams, and again, the ACLU's head of the ACLU, her husband didn't get his ballot in time. In New York, Neil Rosenstein, the chief voting rights attorney for the New York Public Interest Group, his daughter, I won't mention her name on the air, but she didn't get her mail-in ballot. Turns out she was scrubbed. Her father, the big shot lawyer, went with her to try to get her a vote, and they said, no, here's a provisional ballot. Go have fun with yourself. We know what provisional ballots are. I won't say they're never counted. I want to be very careful about that. About 1 in 3 or so of the provisional ballots are never counted. But there were 3 million provisional ballots in 2016. 1 million weren't counted. And I'm telling you, Hillary Clinton's victory was in that pile of 1 million ballots thrown out because young voters and voters of color get provisional ballots about 300% or more often than older white people. And so you've got a big problem here with the mail-in, but we can figure out how to do it. We can figure out how to fix it. But that's
we've got 5 states that are all mail-in ballots, and you've got another 4 or 5 states where it's super, super easy. It seems to me that we need we need to establish voting as a right, so the states are right now it's opt-in rather than opt-out, if you know what I'm talking about. Is there a movement toward that within the Democratic Party?
Yeah, there is among the Democratic Party, but guess what? They don't control the Senate, Tom. I think you're aware of that. Right. So we can have all kinds of great ideas. Amy Klobuchar has a bill in. Senator Harris has a bill in. A lot of people have bills in. We're going to have to take care of our own vote. We're going to have a campaign of education. Like things like, don't use your own envelope. And I'm sorry, and if it didn't arrive, you're going to have to go down to your county clerk's office and pick up that ballot. Or
call them and ask them to mail you a new one?
Yeah, if you can get to them, and that's always a problem. Right. So because remember, we're not talking now about a few thousand people asking for absentee ballots. We're talking about states going from less than 100,000 absentee ballots to several million, as in Georgia. Some of it, I won't say that I'm not going to let them off the hook and say it's not intentional because they know what's going to happen here, and they are hostile to the mail-in voters. In fact, things are going the wrong way. Like in Georgia, there's a bill in to prevent the state from sending out cards asking you if you want a mail-in ballot. The governor did send out,
and that's not unique to Georgia, by the way.
Yeah. And so they're trying to stop people from even being sent a postcard saying, would you like to mail in your vote? Would you like to get a mail-in ballot? And this is our biggest problem, by the way, that the reason 22% of mail-in ballots don't get counted, according to MIT Caltech study, that's 1 in 5 votes don't get counted, is that the biggest loss is people not getting their ballot in the first place. You can't mail it back. You can't mail in a ballot if it's not mailed to you. And, and of course, so they're trying to slow that down. By the way, it's not true. You can't we're not going to get thousands and millions of ballots from Kazakhstan and Russia filled out because every mail-in
ballot. This is Trump's latest thing.
I know.
It's hysterical.
Well, I mean, maybe he mailed his ballot to Moscow, so I have no idea. But it doesn't go the other way because each ballot has a code on it, and you can't just start mailing in ballots because they won't have the code or they'll be matched with someone else. So it's I don't even know why I'm talking about fraud in mail-in ballots being mailed from other countries. This is how ridiculous the discussion has become, Tom. It's gone into nutcaseville because of Agent Orange. And so, no, I do want to assure people, no, your mail-in vote won't be flooded out by a bunch of guys from the Ukraine mailing in for Rand Paul. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. But the bottom line is, if you are presented with the choice, or presenting yourself essentially with the choice of either going through the hassle of getting a mail-in ballot or simply not voting because you're not willing to die in order to vote, go to the trouble of getting the mail-in ballot, even if it does get screwed up, right?
And look, we have to, some of it is learning how to fill out a mail-in ballot. You think, well, it's because it's not just, pick and lick. You don't just pick a candidate and lick the stamp. Number one, you may need 2 stamps. We had over 100,000 ballots in 2016, mail-in ballots, deep sixth because they were missing a stamp or 2 stamps. Like in Ohio, you really need 2 stamps. And so and people don't know this because, again, a lot of these GOP states are terribly hostile to mail-in voting.
Well, here in Oregon,
learn how to do it.
The envelopes are postage paid. You don't have to put a stamp on them. I mean, it's
in Oregon,
not in Georgia. Friggin' easy. Yeah, no, I get it. Greg Palast is his new book, and you're going to want to read this. How Trump Stole 2020, The Hunt for America's Vanished Voters. Be out in a couple of weeks. Greg_Palast on Twitter. Greg, thanks so much for dropping by.
You're the best, Tom.
Keep doing the great work, Greg.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls. Stick around. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. John in Auburn, California. Hey, John, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. What I want to say is you had Dr. Frank on earlier talking about Adolf Hitler, Jim Jones, what they have in common. What he didn't mention was they were both methamphetamine addicts. Hitler was being injected 4 or 5 times a day with heavy doses of methamphetamine. Jim Jones, you can just use your own eyes on that one. Donald Trump, I believe, there was a person that worked. Yes, Adderall, crushed up Adderall.
Adderall is 1/3 methamphetamine.
You can hear it when he's at the podium and he can't get through a sentence without sucking up through his nose that he's got a packed nose. People have come out publicly and said that he was doing this on The Apprentice. I myself was a methamphetamine addict for 15 years. I can see all the symptoms in his personality. This cannot end well. He's letting people die for a feeling and a sense of power. There's no way to develop a person into a paranoid, delusional state of self-love easier than with methamphetamine. And as things close in on him, his decisions will become more and more irrational. With the words that come out of his mouth will become more irrational. Watch him when he's speaking at his rallies. He will be sweating profusely under his upper lip. He is a drug addict. And until that's addressed, nothing can possibly change.
Yeah,
that's all I want. After 15 years, I know that I am right. And we cannot.
I believe you are, John. I absolutely believe you are. And I think you said it very well. Thank you. Tim in Fountain Hills, Arizona. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Tim.
I've raised 4 or 5 kids up through the 3-year-old stage, And I've been watching Trump, and it appears to me that he got pegged exactly correctly by Bill Mayer back 25, 30 years ago as a whiny little bleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't seen any action on his part that proves me wrong. And I was wondering if you had comments along those lines. And the actual question I've got for you is, in your experience, what worked best to get those kinds of children into line so that they minded their manners? Was it fear of the rod?
I think, Tim, we're going to hit the break here in a second. If you want an answer, let me just toss it in here real quick. We had a psychologist on a while ago who said that she thinks that Trump is developmentally stunted because he was basically hated by his father and strongly disliked by his mother. He's still stuck in that 6, 7, 8-year-old developmental stage, and he's never going to get out of it. And all you can do with people like that, it's really, really hard to repair people like that unless they really want to be repaired. And even then, it's very difficult. So mostly what you have to do is separate yourself from them. Take that kind of toxicity out of your life. And that's what we as a country have to do. We just have to, separate ourselves from him. Tim, thanks for the call. I think you're spot on. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. On this one, I'm digging into, or actually kind of taking issue with, a new article that's over on thenation.com titled, "Could Coronavirus End Globalization?" And they've got a bunch of analysts who are weighing in on this sort of thing. And my take is that this is going to be even bigger than that. This depression that we are sliding into is being softened right now by the Federal Reserve throwing $6 trillion at America's largest corporations. 1/3 of all economic activity for a year in the United States. Twice the annual federal budget. The Fed has just parked $6 trillion with a couple of hundred big companies. And it's just masking what's coming. It's going to get bad, and it could become fascist. And so check it out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com, for the people who support our program. Thank you. Thom Hartmann here with you. Janine on the Big Island in Hawaii. Hey, Janine, we were just talking about your island. Yes, Donald Trump seems to think that you shouldn't be so safe there.
Right. I am so glad you brought that up because it's not getting a lot of attention, and I don't know if it's ironic or what that he's threatened that the same day that New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut are wanting to do the same thing. Right. So I'm hoping that they can kind of help back us because we've been totally successful here. And the thing that made the difference with us, in addition to the quarantining, was the masks. It was like as soon as our governor implemented everybody to wear masks and everybody had, that's when our curve dropped down to almost zero right after the masks. It's all about the masks.
Was that back in March?
But beyond that, he implemented it in March, towards the end of March, about the 25th or so. Yep. So it's been a miracle, and most everybody here has been compliant.
Mm-hmm. And you said, but beyond that?
But beyond that, on Saturday, when Trump was giving his speech in Arizona, I heard him say something that no one else has mentioned. I'm wondering if you have heard of this. It was the same day, that morning, Twitter flagged him for some of his stuff on Twitter. He was mad. And during his speech, he said he was issuing an executive order to stop the liability for social media companies, the liability protection for people suing them.
Section 210 of the Telecommunications Act, as I recall. Yeah.
I knew you would know, but I don't know much about this, but I think I recall hearing Mark Zuckerberg say that if it wasn't for that protection, he would never have been able to even start Facebook.
Well, he could have started it. It just wouldn't have gotten to where it is with as much profit. I wrote an op-ed about this a few weeks ago. Myself and a couple of friends of mine, Sue Nethercutt, Nigel Peacock, Brad Walrod, the four of us basically ran 30 some odd forums for CompuServe back in the 1980s and the early 1990s. And CompuServe paid us good money. I mean, we made a really good living at it for a while there. To moderate the forums. I had 34 different forums on CompuServe. I ran the IBM PC support forum, the Macintosh support forum, the ADD support forum, the JFK assassination forum, the International Trade Forum, just a bunch of them. And so if people posted messages, because CompuServe could be held liable if somebody posted something that was defamatory or threatening or whatever, we had to basically read every message. And I mean, there was a certain window of reasonableness. If somebody posted something and we didn't catch it within a few hours, we were in trouble. So we had, 24-hour staffing basically, which is why CompuServe paid us as well as they did. But we caught that stuff. All that ended in 1996, and our gravy train, essentially, our job. Ended in 1996 with the passage of the Telecommunications Act, because CompuServe was no longer responsible for the content that people posted on their forums, on their sites. And that is why Facebook is doing, and Twitter, that's why they are where they are. And what I suggested in this op-ed was that we should blow up Section 210 or 310, whichever it is, this part of the Telecommunications Act of 96 that gives immunity to people who have message boards on which is Facebook and Twitter, et cetera, social media, and their immunity. Mark Zuckerberg is worth $75 billion. If he had to pay people like Nigel and Brad and me and Sue to basically moderate all of the various Facebook content, he might only be worth $70 billion. I mean, it's not the amount of money that CompuServe was paying us. I know it was peanuts compared to the amount of money they were raking in. They were such a huge profit center that H&R Block bought them and sucked them dry. And so, and Trump now is using this as a cudgel against Facebook, because mostly people on the left have been saying,
who has the biggest history of lawsuits being filed in America? Donald Trump loves filing lawsuits.
Oh yeah, exactly. And
what if he just sues the heck out of Facebook and Twitter until they're bankrupt?
He can't sue them because of this immunity that was provided by the Telecommunications Act. But if he can get Congress to undo that immunity,
just wrote an executive. He said he just wrote an executive order removing it.
Right.
In the speech.
See, I know that, and
it's not being reported anywhere.
But see, he doesn't have that power, Janine. He doesn't have that power. I mean, this is, keep in mind, this is a guy who on an average day tells 18 consequential lies. So he was lying to people. This is his way of trying to threaten Zuckerberg and the guy who runs Twitter, Jack Dorsey, I think is his name. He's basically trying to threaten them to say, support me and trash my opponents, essentially. So that's what's going on. Janine, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Thanks for the report from Hawaii. It's fascinating to hear that your governor back in the day, back in March, ordered everybody on the island to wear masks, and boom, your transmission rate just collapsed. That's the same thing Austria, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic have seen. We could here too.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So we have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. Specifically, it's over at thomhartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, et cetera, not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters. Not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln, back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teachers' strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history. the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s, by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Kaye.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So instead of being president, Donald Trump has been sitting in the upstairs of the White House watching Fox News on TV. And Martha MacCallum on Fox News hosted Hank Newsom, the president of Greater New York Black Lives Matter, on her program Wednesday. And the president, he reacted today after the interview was appeared on social media, shall we say. This is mind-boggling. MacCallum said, why would you justify violence in the past in pursuit of civil rights? Something that apparently he had said in the past. And he said, wow, it's interesting you pose a question like that because this country is built upon violence. What was the American Revolution? What's our diplomacy across the world? But back in the what he had said back in the day was something like, if this country doesn't give us what we want, then we'll burn this place down and replace it, all right? He said, I could be speaking figuratively, I could be speaking literally, it's a matter of interpretation. So that's what she was going after him for, having said that a while ago. So Trump tweets, Black Lives Matter leader states, if U.S. doesn't give us what we want, then we'll burn down this system and replace it. This is treason, sedition, insurrection. Right. So speaking of treason, sedition, and insurrection, an 18-year-old black woman says she was deliberately set on fire in Wisconsin by racist white men wearing Hawaiian shirts. Althea Bernstein, who works as an ER medical technician, she's studying to be a paramedic and a firefighter, suffered second and third degree burns. She was stopped at a light at 1 o'clock in the morning Wednesday in downtown Madison. She said, I was listening to some music at a stoplight, and then all of a sudden I heard someone yell the N-word really loud. I turned my head to look, and somebody's throwing lighter fluid on me, and then they threw a lighter at me, and my neck caught on fire, and I tried to put it out, but I brushed it up onto my face. I got out, and then I just blasted through the red. I got it out, got the fire out, and then I just blasted through the red light. She described the assailants as white, classic Wisconsin frat boys wearing jeans and floral shirts. That's the Boogaloo Boys movement. Over at Raw Story now, Sarah Burris reporting Boogaloo militia members have infiltrated the U.S. military and they're aiming to overthrow the American government. Now, to the best of my knowledge, Black Lives Matter, even those people within Black Lives Matter who are breaking with Dr. King and saying, yeah, violence is sometimes justified, are not talking about ending America. You know, they're not talking about a civil war. They're talking about, hey, treat us like you treat everybody else. You know, give us our share of the American dream. What happened to equality under the law? But the Boogaloo Boys, they want a civil war. And now we're seeing that they are actually, they've actually infiltrated our military. And there's several new reports out about this. They're infiltrating our police departments and our military. That's, there is your treason and your insurrection and your sedition, if you want it, Donald Trump. Jamal Bowman, I mentioned this briefly yesterday. I didn't, he's never been on our program. I don't know that much about him, except that he was taking on Elliot Engel in a long shot in New York. Elliot Engel has been reelected like 16 times. Elliot Engel, who was gung-ho for the war in Iraq, who did not like President Obama's Iran deal, who basically votes with the Republicans way more than any Democrat should. Elliot Engel looks like he's been defeated by Jamal Bowman, who tweeted yesterday, and this was just brilliant. It lifted my heart. He tweeted, "I'm a black man raised by a single mother in a housing project. That story doesn't usually end in Congress, but today, that 11-year-old boy who was beaten by the police is about to be your representative. Can't wait to get to D.C. and cause problems for those maintaining the status quo." God bless you, Jamal Bowman. May we have more like you. But the question, what's going on with Trump? What's going on with COVID-19? I think this is a substantial question that we really need to be asking. And our response to it, by the way, this was just absolutely horrified. This is in the New York Times. Jessica Silver Greenberg and Amy Julia Harris writing the headline. The headline kind of summarizes the story, although I'll share a few sentences from the story with you. They just dumped him like trash. That's a quote. Nursing homes evict vulnerable residents. On a chilly afternoon in April, Los Angeles police found an old, disoriented man crumpled on a Koreatown sidewalk. Several days earlier, R.C. Kendrick, an 88-year-old with dementia, was living at Lakeview Terrace. On April 6th, the nursing home deposited Mr. Kendrick at an unregulated boarding house without bothering to inform his family. Keep in mind, this guy has dementia. Less than 24 hours later, he was wandering the city alone. Mr. Kendrick's ouster came as the nursing home was telling staff members to try to clear out less profitable residents to make room for a new class of customers who generate more revenue, patients with COVID-19. Yes, it's an opportunity to make some money. Similar scenes, they write, this again, the New York Times. Similar scenes are playing out at nursing homes nationwide. They are kicking out old and disabled residents, shunting them into homeless shelters, rundown motels, and other unsafe facilities, according to 22 watchdogs in 16 states. Now, I remember when Louise's grandmother was in her mid-90s. She was 92, 93 years old, and we were trying to get her into a nursing home because she'd reached the point where she was starting to get dementia and, was getting near the end of her life. And we were negotiating with nursing homes. She ended up in one. In fact, we moved her out of the first one because it was just terrible. But, this is paid for by Medicaid. You go through all this effort to get your grandma in a nursing home, and then you discover that grandma's been dumped in a homeless shelter? Honest to God? The New York Times, again, more than 10,000 residents and their families complained to watchdogs about being discharged in 2018, the last year for which data is available. That was just the people who took the trouble to complain, 10,000 of them just in 2018. It's mind-boggling. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, the Trump administration, has notified the insurance industry that your profits are more important than public health. You don't have to pay for COVID-19 tests. If somebody has insurance with your company and they get a COVID-19 test and it costs $50, $100, $300, in one case it costs $3,000, if they show up at a hospital and get the test in the ER, you get the whole ER bill. Well, if one of your insured people shows up and gets a COVID test, positive or not, you don't have to pay for the test. Representative Frank Ballone Jr. tweets, once again, the Trump administration is prioritizing corporate profits over people. I'm deeply concerned this will disproportionately impact frontline workers, those people who need regular COVID tests but can't afford to pay for them. Meanwhile, David Javier, in an article published in Yahoo Finance, describes this just absolutely shocking situation that literally there is not a conservative government in Europe that is saying don't wear a mask. Don't wear a mask is not part of the vocabulary of conservatives, of right-wingers in Europe. But it is here. Why is that? This gets back to my original question. Why is Trump so enthusiastic to have a couple 100,000 dead Americans? What's the upside to him? I pointed out a couple days ago, I think that one of the reasons why he's starting to lose so badly to Joe Biden in the polls is that independents and even Republicans are saying, I may love his tax cuts, but I don't want to die. What do you think? Why do you think this is going on?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Why is America one of the only countries in the world where being conservative, in quotes, means don't wear a mask? What the hell is that all about? And welcome back. Tina, watching Free Speech TV in Chicago. Hey, Tina, what's up?
Hi, I think right now we're at a crossroads. We've had beautiful demonstrations that exploded on the scene for the last, 3 going into 4 weeks. And, demanding an end to white supremacy and systematic racism. And now some of these movements are demanding that Trump and Pence and the whole regime have to step down. You had Greg Palast on talking about how the elections can be rigged, how these mail-in voting things cannot work. We have to demand that this regime step down right now. We can't wait. And there's a movement called #OutNow for Trump and Pence. And you can look that up. I think everybody, you're talking about all the crimes of the Trump-Pence regime, including with the COVID virus. We've got to demand into the streets, out now, stop the whole country with nonviolent, massive protests in our millions. That's the only way we can
This sounds, Tina, like the kind of stuff that the Revolutionary Communist Party cult out of New York was pushing back during the Iraq War. Out now. I mean, it is very, very reminiscent, and basically it was just a fundraiser for them and an opportunity for them to reach deeper into legitimate political movements. There is, to the best of my knowledge, no way to end the Trump administration right now. And if you think that getting people on the streets instead of going to work is going to do it, it ain't. You've got 42 million people today who are out of work. So the economy's already shut down.
Well, there are so many reasons why elections won't do it. And I think people.
I get it that the Revolutionary Communist Party and other folks like them who think that, hey, we just need to blow the whole system up, tear it down, start over again, and the people who started it over again are going to be perfect. But that's not the real world, Tina. That's what happens in the minds of, basically hustlers, left-wing hustlers.
You think think that the elections are not going to be rigged and sabotaged like Greg Palast was talking about?
The elections have always been rigged and sabotaged. The thing is, you've got to get around that. If you want, if we divert our efforts away from making sure that people are registered to vote and that they show up to vote, knowing that 5 million of our votes are not going to get counted or are going to be suppressed, but which means we've got to show up 10 million extra people, right? But if we divert our efforts away from that to yelling in the streets and saying, shut it down, we're going to lose. We're guaranteed to lose, Tina.
Vote. People should vote, but they also need to make that demand. I mean, these demonstrations have really moved.
What demand?
What demand for for ending systemic racism and all.
Oh, well, of course. That's why people have been in the streets for weeks, Tina.
Yeah, but Trump is an out-and-out racist. He's part of this, attack, calling out these boogaloo boys, like you mentioned.
I agree, but throwing hashtags at him is not going to stop him. And telling people not to go to work is not going to stop Trump either. Although, there was a time when we actually had that fantasy. Tina, thank you for the comments. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. In our latest video for folks who support our show over at thomhartmann.com, it's pretty mind-boggling, actually. The candidate Trump back in 2016 said, I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid. Every other Republican is going to cut, but I won't. That's what he said. Well, what did his budget actually propose? His budget actually proposed, this is last year's budget. Congress didn't pass it, thank God, but this is what his budget proposed. $1.9 trillion in cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, and $26 billion in cuts to Social Security. And now he is block granting Medicaid to the states, which is already cutting back on Medicaid programs in the red states. You can check it all out over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Freda in Bella Vista, Arkansas. What's up, Freda? Am I saying your name right, first of all?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to get through to you.
Thank you.
I've had so many things going through my head while listening to you on the phone, and you have explained to me why I decided that socialism was the only thing that was going to save this country when I was 15. I'm 78 now. I'm calling because I've never heard anyone say to you that what I believe is going on with Trump's base. I believe that they think that he's been sent by God. I am not a churchgoer, but I see in him his belief that he is omnipotent and that he has been sent here to rescue the world, so to speak. He doesn't call himself or think of himself as the Antichrist, but of course that's what it looks like. But that's what I wanted to say. Now, the book you just referred to, How Wealth Rules the World, I've written it down and I'm going to get it because it supports everything that I have believed since I lived in a family where my father was a capitalist. He worked for the man, and he showed me through his behavior the corruption of capitalism. And I know that there's not anything I can do about this other than try to vote, but it's just twisted. The whole system is twisted. They are using our own rules, beliefs, and so forth against us, and it's working.
I agree, Freda. I absolutely agree, and it is a perversion is not quite the strong enough word. I'm lacking it. Of even the concepts of democracy or a republic as a form of government. It's absolutely bizarre. Freddie, you said it so well. Thank you very much for the call. Aaron in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Aaron, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was wondering the other day, I have never heard of a president going to prison. And people keep saying he has to win 2020 or else he's going to go to prison. Now, a president gets his a paycheck for life, gets his health care for life, and he gets a service for life. So what happens if he goes to prison?
Good question. I don't know, Aaron, and I think it's fairly unlikely that Trump will ever go to prison. He's old, he's obese, he's not in good health. And odds are that, when he gets out, he can tie up any effort to prosecute him in the courts for years and years and years. And I just don't think, physically he's going to last that many years. But you're right. In the past, we had Jerry Ford say, we're going to set Nixon behind us. We're going to put Nixon behind us. You had Bill Clinton saying the crimes of George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan with Iran-Contra. We'll just put that behind us. You had Barack Obama saying the war crimes that were committed by Bush and Cheney, we're just going to ignore those. In all probability, that pattern will be repeated, although it will make me furious. I think it's absolutely wrong. And I think we need to start seriously talking about putting criminals in jail, even though they are, powerful people, white men who have been president of the United States. But I'm with you, Aaron. Pam in Charleston, New Hampshire. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. We're talking about why Trump is doing this, and you got to figure you basically got the Klan running Voices of America now. Okay, and they believe in an all-white world, and I think this is the way of Trump doing a genocide because it's killing more African Americans and Hispanics. And I would be shocked to know what's happening with the children in the border, in the cages. What is going on? Is this a form of genocide where he can get away with it?
Jeez. Genocide is such a powerful word, and
it is.
And you don't want to diminish it. What? No, but he's not going into Mexico or Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and just mass murdering people. What he is doing is he is ignoring or refusing to accede to standards of human rights that the United States helped establish after World War II. That if there are refugees, this is out of the United Nations, the UN Charter. If there is somebody who is a legitimate refugee, whose life would be at risk in their home country, particularly for political purposes, we and other countries around the world have agreed to take those people in, at least on a temporary basis until we can determine what's going on. What Steve Miller has said is if their skin is darker than his, it ain't going to happen. And that's the policy that Trump has put into place. We have to be careful about using words like genocide. But this is criminal. And it's racialized criminality. It's racism, pure and simple, and we need to call it that. And it's inhumane. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour, helping you win the water cooler wars. If we ever get back to water coolers, we'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, We should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
This week on The Science Revolution, about that happiness. Is it time to stop being so careful? Is spontaneity the key to happiness? Professor Janice Brainy is here on plastic rain pouring down in our national parks and everywhere. Tony Corbo with Food and Water Watch drops by to warn Americans the USDA is trying to outsource chicken processing to China and what that means. Tune in wherever you find fine podcasts. Well, the judge in the first level of objection to Mary Trump, Donald Trump's niece, publishing a book about what a terrible man Donald Trump is, which was filed by his brother, who got out of the ICU where he was being treated for undisclosed condition, got out of the ICU just to file this attempt at enjoining, at stopping, blocking the publication of this book. The first judge has said, nope, sorry, you're in the wrong court. Ain't going to happen. At least not here. Go to the New York State Supreme Court if you want to deal with this. Meanwhile, the CDC is estimating that about 6% of the American population, they're doing this based on testing blood samples that were not taken as a consequence of COVID or anything else, just, looking at blood samples that have passed through their hands or those of people, other groups. That about 6% of Americans have been infected with COVID or are currently infected with COVID. And presumably between 20 and 40% of them don't even know it. They don't have any symptoms. But the estimate right now is 20 million Americans. And Greg Abbott is talking about, well, maybe we'll pause this reopening thing. Nice beginning. There are 18 states now where it is required to wear a mask in public. That's a good beginning, although Donald Trump ignores it. And NASCAR has released a photo of the noose that was in Bubba Wallace's garage, and it sure the hell looks like a noose to me. And they searched all the other garages and found no noose. They found some knots, but no nooses. And so, what is going on here? Anyhow, Jack in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So I got online when you were talking about, Trump and his absolute insanity and his craziness. And a story came to me that I learned about when I was living in Germany. And evidently, all of the generals, as Hitler was retreating, because he'd lost, from Paris, he ordered the generals to destroy Paris. And it was really
right, to burn the city to the ground. Yep.
Right. I can't have it, so nobody else can. And the generals refused to do it. And this is the only thing that's giving me hope today, that we have enough people still who will refuse to destroy our country. I think that's what he's trying to do.
I think you're right, Jack, and the fact that he just nominated a right-wing nut job to be for one of the senior positions in the Pentagon gives me considerable concern. If his Secretary of Defense has stood up to him slightly, said basically we shouldn't have been there for that Bible photo op, etc. And as did the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. That gives me some hope, but Trump still has, 9 months to replace these guys? Or 7 months, I guess. Yeah, I'm still very concerned. But Jack, you raise a really, really important story. Thank you very much. And thanks for sharing that. Fran in Florida, Massachusetts. The town of Florida in Massachusetts, Fran? I didn't know there was one.
It's a small one. Hi, Tom. How are you today?
Hey, Fran. I'm great. What's up?
I just wanted to talk about we have a new pandemic coming, and it's called injustice. You know, despite all the medical scientific community, the CDC, WHO, who've all recommended wearing masks, washing your hands, and keeping a far distance away from everybody. And a lot of us are playing by the rules. And yet when you got our president, vice president, holding rallies where, like, as a badge of courage, won't wear the mask, the people that show up won't wear the mask, they sit like sardines in these auditoriums, and they're going to be spreading the virus. And, you know, countries like in Asia and that there, and in Europe that reacted quickly when they discovered this virus. In Asia, there's many countries that the death rate is in single digits. And in Europe, if you look at the charts, we're skyrocketing, and yet the EU is more or less almost bottomed out. You know what I mean? Everything's pretty much under
Austria
control.
saw a 90% drop in transmission simply by mandating the wearing of masks. Absolutely right, Fran. And you know, why the Trump administration won't do this baffles me. That this is the hill that Donald Trump has decided that he's going to politically die on. Baffles me, but that's what's going on. And, you know, I get it. I get the emails from FreedomWorks, the billionaire group, saying we got to open the country back up. We want to make some money. But, you know, I don't think that Trump is just dancing to that tune. Sorry, Fran?
The pandemic that I'm talking about, Tom, is it's getting worse and worse. I heard on the news this morning that one of the largest hospitals in the country is in Houston, and they're at 97% capacity. And you play by the rules, and, you know, you legitimately come down with the virus, and all of a sudden you're turned down because there's no beds. You know what I'm saying?
No, it has the potential to be very, very dangerous. Yeah, no, I'm with you, Fran. And I remember Memorial Day, you know, roughly 3 weeks ago, Louise and I were kind of stir crazy, as I think everybody is, right? And so I said, let's go for a ride. And we're not going to go anywhere in particular, but we're just going to go out and drive around, see parts of, Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, Washington, the sister cities on either side of the Columbia River that we've never seen before. So we went exploring. And as we were driving around downtown Vancouver, there's this new waterfront area that they're developing, and there was a farmer's market there. And there were probably 300 people in this farmer's market, maybe 60 or 70 of them, people running stalls and stands. Those people had masks on, but none of the customers, maybe 5% of the customers had masks on. And I referenced this in an op-ed I wrote for Alternet the following week. That we are going to see 2 or 3 weeks down the road an explosion of cases if what we saw in Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon on Memorial Day, when all these people were out. We live just down the road from a little park, and there were people all over the park without masks on Memorial Day, having family picnics. And I'm like, if this is happening all over the country, then there's going to be an explosion 2-3 weeks down the road. And sure enough, look around you, it's going on right now. And the next explosion that's going to happen, outside of the ones that are going to be, location specific having to do with Trump rallies, the next explosion that's going to happen is going to be old people dying again, because it's going to be, 5, 6, 7 weeks out from, the deaths start happening 6, 7 weeks out. The initial, illnesses start showing up a week or two out. The hospitalizations start 3, 4 weeks out. Now we know the progression of this disease. People visiting dad or grandpa killed them. That's what we're going to see, in my humble opinion. Jeff in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Tom. I appreciate you taking my call. Sure enjoy your show. Hey, I wanted to comment. I'm from North Carolina, obviously, and our cases here are skyrocketing as well. We're one of the 8 states that, if we go to New York, travel to New York, have to quarantine. I have a daughter who lives in Queens. I was planning on visiting her this summer. Looks like that's out. But what I wanted to comment on, Governor Cooper here mandated yesterday that he's going to have the mask mandate start on Friday. So I saw a news clip a few minutes ago here in North Carolina that 3 sheriffs, I don't know what towns they're from, but 3 sheriffs have already declared that they're not going to enforce the mask mandate, that it's unconstitutional, was the quote in the news clip. And I'm just wondering, what in the hell is a sheriff
this morning
doing determining what is constitutional or what is not constitutional? Just want to see what your comments might be on that. Thank you.
Yeah, this is this thought virus that Richard Mack and his buddies have been spreading among sheriffs and police officers in the United States, that they're somehow the supreme authority on all these things around the country. This morning on NPR, I was listening to the morning report, local news here from the Pacific Northwest, and they were talking about how there are sheriffs in Washington State and Oregon who are refusing to enforce mask wearing, where it's just a simple traffic ticket. It's not you don't go to jail for it or anything. We're going to see that. These are the guys, they're watching Fox News, they're listening to right-wing hate radio. They think they're making a great stand for freedom, and they're idiots. Right. I mean, they're just fools. And the country is looking at them with shock and horror and humor. These buffoons who think they understand the Constitution and that the Constitution has something to do with public health. They're wrong and they're fools. Jeff, thank you. It's just, God, I'm so sorry to hear that. And anyhow, we'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Talk media for the sane left among us. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Rudy in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Rudy, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. You know how we used the metaphor with Jim Jones? I don't think that's not a metaphor anymore.
I almost interrupted you to say I'm not sure that's a metaphor.
Right. It's not a metaphor anymore. And a lot of people will get sick. A lot of people will die. And that's the scary part. And the worst part, this is at the feet of white America. I mean, it is. In my mind, I don't, and I don't say that in a in a celebratory manner. It's just for how this guy's manipulating the media, how his
Rudy, to the best of my knowledge, there is no black, no mask movement. There is no Hispanic or Asian no mask movement. The no mask movement, when I see these crowds and these open back up and all this kind of stuff, I see nothing but white people. Is that your point?
Right. Well, what I'm saying is this is going to hit home. Eventually, this is going to hit home, and it's not. We sit up and say, "Oh, Jim Jones is using it as a metaphor." No, this is going down, and it's heartbreaking, Tom, because this isn't going to end pretty.
Yep.
Change has never ended pretty, and a lot of us are going to bite the dust behind this, and it troubles me. My wife, I went to bed last night holding my wife's hand. We just went to bed holding each other's hands.
Your point being?
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
Talk to you. Be good.
Okay. Thank you, Rudy. We need to hang on to each other, I guess. I'm assuming that was your point, Rudy. I thought, what, is his wife sick? No, I get it. Karen in Winter Haven, Florida. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. The book that was written or compiled, actually, I believe her name is Brandy Lee, the psychiatrist from Yale.
Yeah, we had her on this program last year.
One of the essays in there diagnosed Trump with a type of mental illness that if he thinks he's going to go, he's going to take everyone with him. And that's why he's so frightening as having access to nuclear weapons.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
You haven't heard that before, huh?
Yeah, I had. I didn't know that it was in that book, though. I think it's over at the studio, but we have Brandy Lee's book. She was a guest on this show. And you're right, it's a whole series of articles by other people, but, it's an anthology. But I didn't know that there was a specific piece in there that says that. I'll have to look for that.
I found
or maybe
it
we should get
frightening
Brandy
when I
Lee
read
back
it.
on the show. Yeah.
When I
Do you
read it,
remember
I was
which
shaking.
psychiatrist wrote that part, or psychologist?
Unfortunately, no. I'd have to go back to it myself. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Karen, thank you very much. Karen, if you can easily find it in the book, and you can't call back right now because the lines are locked up, but if you could tweet me that information, I would sure like to have the name of that person. Thank you, Karen. Thank you. We'll be right back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. David in Seattle. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How's it going?
Good.
I just wanted to point out, we got these people that are refusing to wear masks, and you just had a caller come in and mention the 3 officers in North Carolina. But there's all these other things that we already have in place, such as no shoot, no shoes, no service. The National Baseball League is implementing no spitting, which was also made a law in 1918 during the Spanish flu. We don't have people in California and Florida who are crying, this is unconstitutional. I can't go into a store unless I put my flip-flops on. Why can't people just wrap their
Which is a
heads
public
around,
health
like,
measure,
this
by the
mask
way.
thing is just one more thing. Yeah, exactly. It's public health. Like we have all these things in public, like to keep the public health, to keep the public safe, and it revolves around like how we act in public. And this mask thing is just another new one. And I just wanted to point out.
You're absolutely right, David. There is. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. Go ahead.
No, we've got this slight delay here, so finish your thought and then I'll riff.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. There's just a huge disconnect with this mask thing and things that are already in place, and I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I am totally with you, David, and there is no constitutional basis for saying that you don't have to wear a mask if that's the law. There is no constitutional basis for it. This is not about freedom. Mark in San Francisco, listening to iHeartRadio there. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Not much, Tom. I think that this election is going to come down to the candidate that can bring the economy back. And I believe that Democrats should start putting
It usually does.
Yeah, and I think in this case especially, and I think we have to beat Trump at that, making the argument that we're the better party with the Green New Deal and infrastructure, and that basically he destroyed this economy, and these jobs that he wants to bring back are no longer there. We have to win that argument.
It's going to be a tough needle to thread, Mark, because the way that, look at the countries that have succeeded in doing this. New Zealand, Australia, Taiwan, South Korea, France now, Spain, Germany. What you have to do is you have to shut the entire country down. And then while the country is shut down, you have to put into place testing and contact tracing, a good, comprehensive, nationwide program. And because you've got a nation, individual states' borders are porous. You have to have a nationwide program. And then once that program is in place and everybody's wearing masks, then you can start opening the country back up. Well, Trump never did that. He shut the country down. We all, allowed the economy to completely collapse for 3 months so that Trump would have time to put into place testing and contact tracing and national mask wearing. He never did it. And then he sabotaged his own shutdown the day after the New York Times and the Washington Post reported that most of the people dying of COVID were not white people. They were black and brown people. And so, Joe Biden is going to have to come along and say, okay, if I become president, I'm going to shut the country down and I'm going to do it right. We are going to have, during that shutdown, we are going to put into place widespread testing and contact tracing so that we can come out of it safely on the other end, the way that all these other countries around the world have done. But the razor's edge there for him is going to be saying, yes, if I'm president, I'm going to shut the country down for the first 3 months. And people are going to go, oh, my God, not again. I'm not going to do that, and all this kind of stuff. So it's going to be tough politically, but this is, in my opinion, this is how it has to play out. Mark, excellent point. Thanks for the call. Peter in New York City. Hey, Peter, what's up? Peter? No, Peter. He's on line 3, Joyce, if you want to check it out. Linda in Detroit. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just fine. What's up?
Hi. My question has to do with the upcoming election and Trump's behavior. Mm-hmm. I was wondering what you think about the fact that his going into the places that they're on the rise with like Tulsa and whatnot on his rallies. Mm-hmm. He really intentionally is trying to have the most amount of people die that he can. He's trying to spread this. Why would
I think it's a coincidence, Linda. Hang on just a second. Here's what's going on. The red states have had, up until the last few weeks, they've had very low rates of transmission, virus, disease, hospitalization, and death. Very low rates. And they're enthusiastically pro-Trump. So Trump thought he would go into the red states where the risk is low, and he would do his song and dance. The problem is that Memorial Day, as I keep pointing out, I think the behavior of people on Memorial Day has caused there to be this micro explosion. And you combine that with all these people coming back from spring break a couple of months ago who seeded the virus all across red state America. Now, the old story of the lily pond. You've got a pond that has no lily pads in it. You plant one lily pad that doubles in size every 2 days or every day. And you come back after a couple of months and you look at the lily pond and it's completely covered with lily pads. Well, on which day was it only half covered? It was 1 day before it was fully covered. At which day was it only 1/4 covered? It was 2 days before it was fully covered. On what day was it only 1/8 covered? It was 3 days before it was fully covered. In other words, it slowly builds up, and then it hits this critical threshold where it's starting to hit, 10%, 20%, and now it's 40%, and now it's 80%. It starts to explode, this logarithmic or this amplification. And that's what's happening in the red states right now, in part because of spring break, in part because of Memorial Day, and in part because just that's how the virus does it. So I don't think that Trump is intentionally doing this, although, his the no mask part of it is clearly intentional, and I agree. I think he is. He's happy to have people die, sadly, tragically. Linda, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Thank you all for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. It'll be Anything Goes Friday, although there may be a guest or two. We'll see how that plays out. In the meantime, be nice to yourself and others around you and spread the good word. Tag You're It. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
you.